President-elect Trump is continuing to fill in his cabinet. We're bringing in our political panel to discuss. Laura Fink, Democratic strategist, CEO of Rebel Communications, and Chad Connelly, former chair of the South Carolina Republican Party and president of Faith Wins. Welcome, both of you. Chad, we'll start with you tonight. Donald Trump Jr. actually said today that the pushback against some of these cabinet picks just proves that they are the disruptors voters wanted. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think so, because you look around and I bet there's never been a presidential elect like this who swept into the week and a half, 2 weeks since his overwhelming mandate of an election to make such rapid change. There's no question in my mind that President-elect Trump has spent the last 4 years, Natasha, thinking about how do we clean up this mess. And from the election results, the mandate, the 312 electoral votes, I think it's pretty clear that he's put some people in those nominated places to say, we're going to make some change in Washington, D.C. This is a reform cabinet, and he's making a clear statement with the people he's putting in place.
Laura, what are your thoughts on some of the names that we've seen in the past week and some of the pushback as well?
Well, it doesn't matter what I think. I think that a lot of them are nuttier than a fruitcake at Christmas time. But the reality is the American people did vote for change, although I wouldn't grant that it was a mandate. You have to be careful because right now the American people are trusting Trump with these picks, but it's really about their effectiveness. So if you nominate, say, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to reform the HHS department, you better make sure the kids are safe. You better make sure that the food is safe. You better make sure that you are not cutting people's health care. That's a big job. And so if he does what he says he's going to do, the American people need to feel it at home and not in a negative way. And a lot of things can go wrong when you don't have the experience that previous nominees have had. You take somebody like Pete Hegseth at the Department of Defense, and I know there are some rumblings of pushback by Republicans on him. And now not only does he have the skeletons in his closet of sexual assault accusations, he also apparently has a symbol of white supremacy tattooed onto his chest. Is this someone who can take care of an $850 billion department and a diverse array of American fighting service members? That's the open question. And so you will see that if these nominees make it through, and I think the large majority of them will, because the appetite of Republicans to push back is near zero. But what will their effectiveness be, and will they be capable of not just making change, but of making positive change, according to the American people?
And Chad, some of Trump's choices for top roles, including Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth, are divisive even among Republicans. Do you think either of them in particular will actually make it through the confirmation process?
Well, the Senate's role is to advise and consent, and the president typically gets their choices. So, listen, she used the term nutty in a fruitcake. All we got to do is look at Biden's people that he's had in office. His administration was filled with people that would fit that nuttier than a fruitcake label. I think these are people who want to reform, are destined to reform, and I think a lot of these are just head fakes, Natasha. Using the Jerusalem cross, which is an old representation of Christianity as white supremacy, is the same as trying to head fake and change the narrative about Kamala Harris's ineptitude and her inability to answer questions. It's the reason that President Trump was elected with a resounding victory. People are sick of this. I watched a little bit of NFL today, and I don't know, 3 or 4 teams doing the Trump dance. College players yesterday doing the Trump dance. The wrestler, the fighter last night doing the Trump dance. People are sick of the woke. They're sick of the nonsense. They're sick of the government overreach, and they're saying it's time for change. President Trump is saying we're putting some disruptors there who are going to make those changes that people want and need.
Laura, I want you to respond to all of that. And also, if you could address, I mean, Speaker Johnson maintaining the Gaetz ethics report should not be released. Your thoughts on that as well?
It should absolutely be released. I think if you're interested in transparency, then transparency, a Republican-led investigation in a Republican House should be released to the American people as part of the advise and consent process and the vetting, because transparency is really critical here. And I would also say this, that many groups, it's not just me, it's not just liberals, have identified that that particular symbol is a symbol of white supremacy and white nationalism and hate. And so this is not something to be argued. And now I can understand why the gentleman is defensive about this, because it's not something that you want to come out, and it's not something that they're particularly proud of. But it is something that I think all of these Republicans are planning to rubber stamp. But it should give the American people pause. But again, he'll be measured if he gets through on his effectiveness, and we'll see if his work in the Fox News green room and as a national defense, a National Guardsman is enough to lead a department of over 2 million people.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.